One of my viewers, Michael, recently dropped off his watch for me to have a look at. It's a brand new Seiko SBDC101. And he said to me, have a look at it, share your thoughts, do a review, see what you think. And I thought, you know what? I'll do one better. I'll compare it to my Seiko SBDC051, the previous generation of the same watch, same release, and to see not only the differences, but whether or not Seiko has kept up their quality control, how these two watches compare side by side from how they wear, how they look, their finishing, their quality, all the rest. So stick around as I do this direct comparison shootout of these two very different, but also very similar watches from Seiko. Welcome back everyone. So as you can see here today, we've got two watches. This one's mine, it's the Seiko SBDC051, and this one here is Mike. It's a friend, it's actually a viewer of mine, and he's popped in. It's the SBDC101 SPB143, it's an abbreviation. And look, Seiko basically has released these two watches. This one was in 2017, this one is current 2020. It's basically a modern reissue of the 62 MAS. This one was more of a reinterpretation or reimagination of the 62 MS, and this one here is closer to its specs, closer to its looks, but some very interesting findings. Today we're going to compare the dimensions of the watch, the bezel action, the accuracy, the feel, the bracelet, how good they are in comparison, the dials, the markers, the movements, the crowns, and lastly, the price. So starting off with both watches, first and foremost, the case dimensions are as follows. So as you can see, a direct comparison, we've got a case diameter of 40.5 versus 42.6 millimeters. So the SBDC051 does look substantially bigger because of that bigger case, and it also wears a lot bigger on the wrist. Now, the case height is something that surprised me. I know the specs say that the SBDC101 is 13.2, but I measure this in at 13.8. So both watches come in at exactly 13.8 millimeters. Now the lug to lug distance is 47.5 millimeters versus 49.5, and both have a lug width of 20 mil. So as you can see with the dimensions, I'll show you guys a wrist shot of the two watches. That's what the brand new watch looks like. So it's a 40.5 millimeters. It sits quite nice on the wrist. In fact, it's petite. It's really petite. The height though makes it sit a little bit on the chunky side, only because it's a small watch. Only because it's a smaller 40 mil watch. And the reason I say that is because I'm used to and comparing it to my SBDC051, and I'll show you guys a wrist shot in comparison to the two. Now in direct comparison to the 051, as you can see, it's a bigger presence on the wrist. But in saying that, the lug to lug distance still doesn't overhang my 7-inch wrist. Now being the same height on both watches, I found that the wider watch, the 051, seems to sit or look, I should say look flatter on the wrist than what the 101 does. So it's an optical illusion because they're exactly the same size height, but because it's wider in its case diameter, it does look like it's sitting lower. So that's the first observation. Now, getting away from the watch dimensions, let's have a look at the bezels. Let's have a look at the bezel comparison. So the 101, if we look at it, I don't know if you can hear that. It's relatively mushy. It's tight, it's relatively mushy. Accuracy wise, yep, it lines up spot on. So there's not an issue with lining up, but there is like a mushiness to the feel of the actual bezel action. Very similar to most Seikos that I'm used to. Let's have a look at mine. A little bit louder, still mushy, not as mushy as the 101. And lining up, spot on again. So they both seem to line up perfectly, which is a big plus for both watches, because as of late we've seen Seiko's quality control, they don't seem to line up very well at all. So these are doing a fantastic job, really nice job. Now let's get on to the bracelets. The bracelet on the new version, as you can see, it's an oyster bracelet and it's fully brushed. It's polished on the sides, but it's a fully brushed surface over here, but a little bit on the loose side. And the only reason I say that is because I'm used to what the 051 is like, and a little bit rattly, a little bit on the rattly side. So that's a little bit of a disappointment. I've noticed that the way that this thing fits is also a little bit loose. As you can see, Seiko is still suffering from a little bit of quality control, and that's a shame. But getting back to the bracelet itself, there's a bit of a wobble. The finishing on it, look, it's pretty much Seiko quality, you know, what you'd expect at this sort of price point. But I'm finding that, yeah, it's a little bit of a disappointment having this much movement and this much rattle in the bracelet. If you compare it to the previous version, there's not that much movement. It's relatively tight, which is good. And that's brilliant. Look at the difference. So there's a marginal difference in that. I think the build quality on the 051 was better. In fact, it's a slightly different bracelet. It's a little bit more aggressive in its styling and so forth. But the tolerances are much nicer. So that's an interesting observation. And again, I wouldn't have known that unless I owned this watch. And because I own this watch, I know, and I've experienced this over the last 2 or 3 years, I know exactly its goods, bads, and difference. Now getting the brand new release, the brand new model, I can be a little bit critical and say, well, hey, it seems to me that they've dropped their guard when it comes to the, they've dropped the ball a little bit when it comes to the bracelet. So, but let's move on. The dial. As you can see on the 101, you've got a beautiful sunburst dial. It's a gray finish, and you know what? I love it. It's probably closer to the original 62 MAS, and I really like what they've done with this. It seems to play with the light just beautifully. The reimagination, the 051, is more of a matte finish. I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. In fact, I like it because it's, that's why it is my watch. But in comparison directly, if I had to choose, I'd probably say the grey sunburst. I think it's slightly nicer. It gives the watch a little bit more character, which is quite nice. I like that. Now, looking at the markers on the dial, I can't say that I like what they've done on the new version. To me, it seems to be, they seem to be a little bit, I don't know, it's, for a better word, they look cheap. They look cheap. The 051 seemed to be beautiful, sharp, polished, infilled very nicely. This one just, I don't know, I've not been able to get my head around it, guys, and just looking at these in the flesh here in comparison, and again, this is all subjective. My personal preference is the type of markers on this particular watch, on the 051. It just, for me, visually, it looks better. Again, that's a personal preference. As it comes to the loom, I should actually, before we continue, I should express that you notice the hands on this particular watch, the 051, these have been swapped out. I basically purchased aftermarket hands from this company, and we basically got them installed. This comes with a broad arrow hand, so the loom on these particular hands are not the same as what you'd get from the markers, being aftermarket hands. But speaking of the loom on both watches is quite nice. The 051 is that little bit better, a little bit brighter, and it also seems to last a little bit longer. So that's just a direct comparison between the two watches. Now, getting onto the movement of both watches, the brand new version has the 6R35. This one, the 051, has the 6R15. So very similar movements, same architecture. The main difference is power reserve. So you're getting 70 hours on the left hand side here, 70 hours of power reserve here, as compared to 50. I've never had an issue with 50, but in saying that, it's wonderful to have the extra 20 hours. You put the watch aside, you might not wear it for a few extra days, pick it up, it's still got power reserve, which is great. But in saying that, with both movements, I've had them on the time grapher. The 101 is losing 5 seconds a day. The 051 is gaining 5 seconds a day. So that's pretty much irrelevant because both have not been regulated. You can get them on the time grapher. You can spend some time and you can get them to a really nice accurate figure. But -5, +5, neither here nor there. So that's quite more than acceptable within Seiko tolerance. Now the crown, if you have a look at the crown on these watches, the 101 has a brushed finish crown. It's really nice. Let's just unscrew it. Okay. The winding action, as you'd expect from the 6R35, nice. The latch on action, yes, it latches on smoothly, perfectly, not a problem. The 051, as you can see, it's got a polished crown at the edge, same sort of knurling. Unscrew, winding is exactly, it feels exactly the same, no difference, smooth on both of them. The latching on, perfect. It's probably a little bit smoother only because it's a used watch. I've had this for several years. This will obviously loosen up a little bit as well. So being a brand new watch, I expect that to, but again, I'm only being nitty-picky here, guys. They feel pretty much exactly the same. They latch on exactly the same, which is great. Now getting onto the price of both watches. This one comes in at a particular figure today, which I think, for me personally, I think it's slightly elevated, slightly high for what you're getting, only because I'm used to what I paid for this. These came out at $1,100 Australian, and I think, they have they added extra value? Have they done, more with these watches and so forth? I don't know. I think you're pretty much getting the same watch, slightly differently designed. I like the fact that this has copied the original's case design, which is slightly bulkier and chunkier, very similar 1960s hues, which is quite nice. But in saying that, being a 40.5 mil and the same thickness, it seems to wear a little bit chunky on the wrist. Whereas the reimagination, what they've done with this, I think they've smoothed it out a little bit. As you can see with the lugs, they're a little bit smoother and more slender designed. Again, these are just personal preferences, guys. One's chunky, one's more smooth. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. At the end of the day, these are tool watches. One, to me, looks a little bit more sexy. This one looks a little bit more traditional to what the original 62 MAS would look like. Now, in summing up, guys, I think both the watches are wonderful. I think they both operate really well as tool watches. I think they've let the ball down a little bit on the bracelet on this particular version, only because I know the tolerances and how good this watch is, which is great. Apart from that, everything else seems to be pretty much on par, quality, finish, all the rest. The case lines themselves, as you can see, this is a chunkier looking watch, but it does wear smaller because it is a 40.5, whereas the 051 is a slender, more smoother looking watch. It does present bigger, being a bigger dial, being a bigger size as well. So as far as having a market, I think this will find a greater market for smaller wrist sizes, whereas the 051, obviously around the 7-inch, 7.5-inch wrist, brilliant watch. So, but all that said, guys, great little watches. I think price-wise, a little bit expensive. I think Seiko's bumped the price up to, what are they, 1,900 or something. They introduced it, Australian dollars, they introduced this at. This one was 1,100 when I first purchased it. So, it's a bit of a, it's almost double the price. It's almost double the price. Are you getting double the quality watch? No, I don't think so. If anything, I think marketing has a lot to play with it, and consumer, demand and supply. So a lot of people are wanting something like this. So, Seiko plays off the back of that, charge extra money, why not? But will I be buying one of these since I already have this? Question, answer. My short answer is no. My long answer is no. I actually do like this watch quite a bit. I'm more than happy with what this does. And like I said, I've changed the hands out on this. I didn't mind the broad hands. I wanted to see what it looks like on this. And look, after seeing it this way, I'm happy, but I'll probably go back to the broad hands one day. I've kept them. I'll probably go back to the broad sword hands and put them back in because I think its character suits its styling. But again, personal. That's my personal take on that. And with the new version, again, it's found a good place in the market. I think it is, like I said, a little bit expensive for what they're offering. There's no reason why they couldn't have kept the price, as the original, as the first reissue. But it is what it is, guys. You pay a premium. You want to get into something like this. Subjective. I do love its dial. I think its dial is beautiful. I think the grey sunburst is spectacular. It's wonderful. The bezel itself, look, I've gotten used to the polished finish of this one. They're both aluminium. This one here's got some sort of a high gloss lacquer on it. I've never scratched it. Sometimes I've had it as a daily wearer and I've never scratched it. It's been great. So, you know, I think they should last the test of time. Brushed as compared to polished, I'm used to this. I think it looks a little bit more dressier as a tool watch, but a little bit more of a dressy, blingy tool watch. This one's more toolish, more closer to the original. So, but thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed that. A couple of thoughts on both watches. I tried to be as neutral as possible, owning this one and not really trying to lean towards, oh, this is better, this is worse. No, that's not my intention here. I want it to be as clear as possible. I do see some differences, some better, some worse. You know, like I said, bracelet, markers. For me, markers subjectively, I do prefer this. I think they're just sharper, cleaner. The loom is better, as you can, as I've seen in direct comparison. Apart from that, two lovely watches from Seiko. Guys, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all in the next video.